afternoon. Oh, come on, good afternoon. Thank you. And thank you for making the journey over here, although I guess somebody is staying in this corner, but it was a bit of a journey for me to find it over here. So thank you for coming. I have an interesting topic, I think, for you today. It's called Succeeding in Economies of Speed, and importantly, rethinking your levers. We are operating in a world that is constantly changing, and we have to create a culture and an environment in our teams that can adapt and take advantage of this world in which we live. My name's Miriam McLemore, and I'm an enterprise strategist with AWS. Prior to joining AWS, I was a customer. Like many of you in the room, I was with the Coca-Cola company for 26 years, so a long time. So culture change was something that we had and tried to focus on so that we could adopt technology more quickly. And that's really the conversation that I want to have with you today, is the changing role of technology and how that can impact company culture. Certainly, cloud technology has completely changed the dynamic that we are working with. I grew up in a world of big mainframe technologies and Teradata machines and things that weren't quite as flexible as the environment that we work in today. And so I have an analogy for you. When I was young, music came on cassette tapes, right? And you had a limit on each side of how many minutes of music, about 45 minutes of music on each side of a cassette tape. And if you're of that generation, you got really good at spinning the tape to rewind it back up. And you couldn't really start and stop where you wanted to start and stop. And so this great new invention came along called the CD, which was a much better but similar capability, right? You still had to have a player, but now you're still limited to how much music on each side. But now you could start the music where you want. It was much more durable medium than the cassette tape, which I often got caught in the little player and you'd rip the tape out, and that wasn't such a great thing. But then, very quickly after CDs, came music streaming, which completely changed the model. Right, it changed the model for record companies. It changed the model for artists. It changed the model of buying a record. You weren't trapped to buying a full record just because people had put the one song you wanted on that record. Now you could buy any song you wanted separately, and you could play it on multiple devices. So I didn't have to have my Discman, right, or my Walkman with me. I can play on my phone, I can play at my home, I can play at my car, right? It opened up the music industry to a whole different way of working. And so I would submit to you, cloud has done the same thing. Originally, we had this technology, the cassette type of technology, that old mainframe type of technology that I started with, COBOL programming. And then we moved to better technology, like the CD. We improved, we modernized, we bought new solutions. It was a better, but really a digital copy, but a better environment. Cloud changes the model. Right, we're going from these big, heavy capital investments that we're kind of stuck with and we depreciate over time to a consumption model of technology and a foundation that enables, you heard the announcements over the last couple days, that keeps changing. Cloud keeps changing, the tech on cloud and the capabilities that are available to you keep changing. So the ability to now have a culture that can leverage that environment is the challenge. Because we used to operate in economies of scale. You'd do a project, right? And you expected an outcome. So you do the project, you got to the end of the project, you went, whew, good, we can return to business as usual. We did that project, it's done. That's no longer our reality. Now in a world of economies of speed, it's constant change. Constantly adapting to new technologies, constantly leveraging new skills, growing your team, growing your capabilities, inventing new ways of, or new revenue streams, new ways of working, new ways to combat risk. And so change is becoming the new normal. And there's no target state in that model. I don't get to go sit back and go, great, I'm back to the way it used to be. I'm back to business as usual. That is challenging for many organizations to accept that that is a new way of working. Because what we haven't done is we haven't changed our language. In IT, we have always talked about absolutes. We would talk about you trade off. Is the trade-off quality? Is the trade-off time? Is the trade-off budget? Right? What is the trade-off that we're going to make? Because we dealt in these absolute numbers and figures, investment, right? Budget, timeline, capacity, use cases. And now, in a world of cloud technology and constant change, we operate with new language. It's about relatives and rates, burn rates. It's about price per unit. It's a consumption model. It's about velocity and the cost of experimentation. And if we don't change our language that we use, we're not going to get the cultural change that we need. And cloud certainly matches the economy of speed language and approach. And so that's easy to say, but a little bit harder to do when you're talking about change. And so what we're trying to do is create an organization that can develop streaming, not the organization that's going to replace our old cassette tapes with compact disc. So what does that look like? IT has this classic conflict, and I was the corporate CIO for the Coca-Cola company, and I lived in this rock and a hard place position, where IT was often measured on harmonization, standardization. It was a cost center. And then I had the business teams that were measured on innovation and agility. And I was in marketing prior to coming to IT, so my marketing colleagues were like, what are you doing? Speed up IT, right? Deliver quickly. We need capabilities to meet the business objectives. And a lot of the problem, at least I believe, comes from a different business model that we're operating in. The business is operating in a model that is focused on new ideas and innovation, speed and agility, and value and results. IT often is measured on operational excellence, as it should be. I'm not saying don't have operational excellence, but cost optimization, security, compliance, we need those things. Not submitting to you that we shouldn't, but there's an intersection. You see in this picture, they are separate. And IT's over here operating, often without it almost irrelevant what the business does for a living, right? IT's running almost as a separate entity. And so the challenge is merging these models, because that is where new digital products and services live, is at the intersection of the business strategy, innovation, and the technology capabilities that we now have in front of us. And so how do we create that and? We often in my career talked about the power of the and, standards and innovation, right? I want speed and quality. I want customization and low cost. I want short-term game and long-term viability. So how do we go about creating that? Because what we are looking for is a world that sees more dimensions than just cost, operational resilience, and security. We want to see all of the dimensions from a technology standpoint, and we want to operate with fewer constraints. And that also sounds like a rock and a hard place. So what do? How do you change your operating model? Some people go, okay, I buy in, I get it, I believe I have to change, right? And so I'm going to look at my processes against my current operating model and translate them into this new cloud world. That doesn't work. And I've seen many companies start and get stalled because they're using old processes in a new world. And it is not working for them. And so you cannot just simply tune your current operating model. You actually have to retranslate your objectives into this new tech ecosystem. So what do? We need to rethink the levers that we have and that we have historically used and see if we can get our organization to actually work differently. Because transformation is not just about doing what we've always done better. It is about working differently, thus the word transformation. And that also gets lost. People say, oh, we were sold a bill of goods with transformation. It didn't work. Well, it wasn't a project. It is a different way of working. If you're transformed, you were something, and now you're something else. And that, I think, we have lost in the process because we're so used to projects that have a beginning and end, and we are so comfortable going back to the way we used to work. So if you were just going to make slight changes, that's optimization. It is not transformation. So what we would suggest, and what I have seen work with the customers, so I get to work with customers all over the world, is looking at the levers that you have historically used and translating them into a new model. Traditionally, when you are thinking about making a change, you look at your organization structure, right? You adjust the org structure, you adjust your processes, you impose some new constraints into the model because we're going to work differently, we need some controls, we've got to be secure. And then when that doesn't work, you just grant some exceptions to the process. I just actually got an exception granted the other day, right? So even at Amazon, we occasionally have those processes that need an exception. What we want you to think about is a new model where you create flywheels, where you reduce the friction in your environment, where you deploy mechanisms. I was listening to Rahul Pathak speak at one of the sessions and talked about discipline equals freedom, right? And that's when we talk about mechanisms. Mechanisms are consistent and common ways of working that allow the freedom and the autonomy that you want your teams to have. You don't want anarchy. You want to push down decision-making within a framework. So deploying mechanisms and then, as a result, fostering autonomy. So let's talk about those. So if you look at this organization model and you ask, which organization is higher performing? Your gut reaction might be, well, the one on the left is too hierarchical, so obviously that one is slower. The one on the right looks flatter, so maybe that one's better. An organization structure in and of itself is not right or wrong, right? Because if I said to you, well, actually the one on the left, the teams are organized into tribes and these are agile managers and we have a product focus, well, maybe that starts to sound better, and maybe the one on the right is broken into silos. We've got our product management separate from our development, separate from our QA, and then maybe we outsourced our development just to complicate it a little bit farther. Any of you lived in this world? And so, again, organization structure in and of itself is neither good or bad, but it can be a barrier. So it's not the place to start. What we would suggest is start with a flywheel mindset. That is certainly the Amazon mindset. So rather than looking at structure and a change to people's job titles, which may or may not change actually what they do, look how change actually happens. It happens in small increments. It doesn't usually happen in giant leaps. And so those small incremental changes reinforce an additional change, and then that is how you begin a flywheel. So, for example, if you started by migrating applications to the cloud, right, that will provide you with the benefit of improved uptime, right, and lower cost. So this enables you then to begin to look at other aspects of your portfolio, and with a lower cost structure, now can we experiment? We have some more money that we could put back into the system, and we have shorter cycle times on those experiments. And then if I can do that, maybe I can actually process more ideas. So is there a way that your team can start by modernizing, not just migrating, and that's the destination and we're done, right? This idea of continuous improvement, and make a change, leverage the impact of that change, make the next change, drive a culture of experimentation, get a culture of faster feedback and agility so that you can actually push more ideas. Because when I talk about Amazon's approach, I compare it often to more of a venture capital model where we are willing to try 100 ideas and then see which ones work, give them seed round, let them get incubated, and then the ones that work, invest more, double down on those ideas. Start small. What we used to do when I was at Coca-Cola, if we had 100 ideas, we would down select those ideas to 50, then we'd shrink it down to 25. It looked really good on a PowerPoint. You had 100, then we got 50, then we got down to 25, and then we picked the 10 big rocks. And then we drove the 10 big rocks, and we assigned a senior leader to each of the 10 big rocks, because if you have a senior leader, then obviously you have an executive sponsor, and that's a good thing. All of that makes a lot of sense, and I did it. So I get it. The problem is the 100 did not become 10. The 10 got bloated because no one was willing to let go of their ideas. So they said, oh, my idea is actually akin to your idea. They're cousins. I'm from the South. They're actually cousins, and they should stay together. So the 10 were actually, 20-ish per 10. And that scope blow with that senior leader, the senior leader was willing to throw good money after bad because their name was on it. When you stay smaller at the 100, and you are only failing more like a VC, you expect some aren't going to make it. You expect more like a baseball batting average, right? Batting 300, it's pretty good. So a different expectation when you keep things smaller. That's the mindset of a flywheel. So what does that mean in terms of organization, which is where we started this conversation? What often happens when we have these separate teams is you have friction between the teams because you have this relearning cycle or you have objectives that are not aligned. So this team scored, if it's the infrastructure team, they're measured on getting things migrated. If it's the Cloud Center of Excellence, they're trying to get things to cloud and maybe re-architect a few. The application teams have a different agenda, right? The product teams have another agenda. The innovation team is, apparently, they're the group that's going to dream up all the innovations, which is also a challenging model. And so getting to a place where you have aligned objectives, whatever structure you choose to use, but aligning objectives so we're all rowing in the same direction. It's very tough to get in a boat and have people with oars of different lengths and sizes rowing in different directions. You don't go anywhere fast. And so aligning your objectives across these teams to drive efficiency and speed. Speed matters. So structure is a means to an end. Feedback loops are important for continual improvement. So talking about friction. So in structure, you can have friction, but you can have friction in your processes. And I like this analogy. I've become an F1 fan, like many, Drive to Survive helped. I actually got to go to an F1 race. That helped too. But the question is, why do cars have brakes? And people, I think your knee-jerk reaction to that is to slow down or to stop. But if you think about it, you actually have brakes so you can go fast, right? Because if it didn't have brakes, I can't go that fast. But if I have brakes, I know I can stop, then I can go faster. But if you run, and I've accused my 90-year-old father of doing this, driving with the brakes on all the time, it's not very effective, and that is what happens often in our processes. You're telling the teams to go fast, but you're gating them. You are doing security reviews. You have steering committees. You have all of these stop points that you're saying, speed up, get this thing to the finish line. But I have my brake on the whole time. And so your team is feeling this friction and feeling the frustration, and you're burning out your car or your team in this analogy. So getting, again, to smaller initiatives is the way to combat this friction, because when you have big projects, they drive higher risk, which drives more controls, which drives more overhead. So this is also a flywheel, but it's running in the wrong direction, right? It's slowing you down instead of speeding you up. And so friction is the enemy of economies of speed. And so finding in your processes, in your organization, the points of friction and working to lower them or remove them entirely through good mechanisms is what we would suggest. Because this process of higher risk, more controls, leads to some bad behavior, sandbagging, right? Because people are trying to balance out what you've asked them to do. It tempts people to defer. You increase technical debt because, this thing's gotten big, it's gotten fragile. So be careful with this pushing to larger and larger. Anything that you can do to shrink the size of programs, we often talk about that shrinks the blast radius, right? If there is an issue, the blast radius of something small is relatively small. The blast radius of these big programs takes people out, whole communities, right? Be careful. And it's about more than just moving fast. It is about creating a small project that then can grow, you can iterate, you can hear feedback, you can change, you can pivot, right? So it's not just about risk and shrinking the blast radius. It's also about, we learned, we put something out there, we got some feedback, we're gonna pivot. And I like this concept of maximize the work not done. If you said that to your teams, right, we are gonna maximize the work not done, versus we're gonna try to do every single thing we can. If we can't cram it into phase 1 or release 1, we're gonna cram it into release 2. In this, it is ruthless reprioritization and only do the things that have impact. So actually tell your team, we're gonna maximize the work that we don't do. That would be a breath of fresh air to many teams. So something to consider. Reduce this approach, because of its iterative nature, reduces the cost of error, moves you from prediction or opinion to actually data and feedback and facts, and allows you to course correct and create a more agile approach to working. And it attracts talent, because people prefer to work in an environment where they are moving forward versus waiting on the next review or gate meeting or whatever the process is. So reducing friction isn't about efficiency, it's about working differently with your teams. So, and I like this quote from Bezos about processes, and we just talked about processes. Good processes serve you. And so you can serve your customers if you get good processes, but you gotta be careful of those processes that just become a proxy and they're no longer driving the results you want. I've talked to a lot of companies about, Coke sat in a room and said, how many people feel fully empowered to say no to work and stop work? We very quickly made a list, right? HR can say no, legal can say no, procurement can say no, finance can say no, security can say no, architecture can say no, right? What's the list of all the people that feel fully comfortable stopping work? Okay, how many people on this wall can say yes? How many people can green light work? I mean, it was a very short list. Because you're like, well, the CEO probably can say yes, but he probably still is going to check in with legal, right? How do you shrink it down so more people are incented to get work to the finish line securely, with good contracts, with good financial stewardship, with all of the things that you put those processes in place to do, but at some point, they lost the focus on the business outcome they were driving, and people were executing the process, and they said, oh, we're good. I ran the process, so we must be okay. That's a proxy. That's not focusing on the outcome. So, how do you do this? How do you embed these checks so that you don't have to ride your brakes into the future? And I love, again, you know, it's analogy day for you in the afternoon. Trains. So train wheels, how do they stay on track? It's interesting. The trains, because the wheels are tapered, when they go around or they become unstable, right, they are self-correcting because of the slant of the wheels. I didn't know this about trains till someone shared this analogy with me. And I was like, oh yeah, I've seen train wheels my entire life, but the fact that they're slanted adjusts the train and keeps it upright. So the trains, where these wheels were originally designed 150 years ago for trains that did not move that fast, still are the same design for trains that move very quickly in our world today. And it's about automating the ability to give your teams to self-correct. And what are some of those alerts? Versus what we've talked about a lot in recent years, I think, is guardrails. You do not want to slam into a guardrail. Guardrails are good, right? Because they'll keep you up, not going over the cliff, but still slamming into a guardrail is pretty ugly. Airbags go off, you know, bad things happen. You want to actually stay on the road. And so what are alerts? What are things that you can put into your system that tell your team, hey, warning, you're nearing the edge, like cars do now. They beep at you, right? What are the things that you can automate for your team that doesn't say, oh, you're over budget, but your budget's creeping up. You need to make an adjustment, right? You've got, you're about to overrun. Here's an adjustment. So how do you automate to stay on track versus slamming into guardrails? So leveraging self-correcting mechanisms is how we talk about that in IT. So there are tools that you can use. There's decision-making, getting the layers out so people are closer to the decisions. They can see the impact of the decision they made. The teams are principle-based. They know how they're making decisions and on what principles decisions should get made. These are all self-correcting mechanisms. And you have a cross-functional team together so that they can share perspectives and ideas of how do we stay on track, where are we about to overrun. So using these kind of mechanisms, again, to avoid the guardrails. Guardrails are good, but let's not hit them. Let's try to avoid doing that. So that's in place of injecting yourself into the decision-making process. It's about creating transparency and automated feedback mechanisms. So I realized that I was doing this wrong at one point in my career when there was a line outside my door. I felt like I needed one of those number takers, right? Because everybody needed me for the decision. That is not a good management style. If everyone needs to come ask you to move forward. So how do you get yourself out of that so as a leader you can lead and your team has the right feedback mechanisms to adjust course? So guardrails, they're an emergency device. Mechanisms are there to keep you on track while you move fast. This is another thing to look at. Might not be an issue in your organization, was an issue in my organization. The question being, how long does it take a resource? If the answer is, it depends on who asks, that's not a good process. That was the case in our organization on occasion. If so-and-so asked, well, obviously it only takes a day. If somebody else asks, well, it takes a couple months. That is not an effective approach if you are trying to create autonomous teams and an approach that is consistent across your organization. The answer you'd like to have is everybody gets, right, the fast response. And so working with your organization to identify those areas, again, that have friction, that you need a better mechanism or process for, that aren't people dependent, is an important aspect because we need our teams to have the ability to decide and not wait. But again, we are not looking for anarchy. We're not looking for everybody to paddle in their own direction. Autonomous teams actually require more leadership, not less. And the cloud democratizes access to resources for your teams. It allows for control and transparency without those bottlenecks and constant innovation. But I think there's a fear in some people of letting the power of the cloud and making it available to your teams. And so making an environment that has the right mechanism so that you can leverage the power of the technology is absolutely critical. And not, as my colleague says, making it dependent on an individual, because that's a black market and not efficient. So we talked about defining structure, following process, imposing constraints, and granting exceptions was our old model, and suggest that you look at smaller increments of work, creating flywheels that reinforce more in an iterative, agile manner, removing friction, deploying mechanisms, and fostering autonomy within your team. And then if you can do that, then it allows you to begin to improve continuously. So again, this constant change, constant learning, moving faster, and staying on track, not slamming into guardrails, self-correcting, staying on track, and pushing decision-making down to where people actually know more about the subject. And then I said, leading in economies of speed, it actually requires more leadership. I think there's a fear sometimes in middle management that if we go to these autonomous teams, what do you need me for? Because I manage this big team. When teams are making decisions, you need more leadership because one, as a technology leader, you need to understand the systems that are available to your teams and the decisions that are getting made about those systems. But you also need to be able to be a people leader that leads through change with empathy for your team that is operating in a very new model. And so a modern leader really has to get in deep and understand what the technology can do for you. Because what we used to do as leaders is make proclamations. Hi, we're going to reduce IT costs by 10%. Right? We're going to migrate all the workloads to the cloud. We're going to become agile. We're going to transform IT from a cost center to an innovation center. Some of you in this room must have heard these proclamations. They didn't work out all that well because often they were not measured on the right criteria. And so people moved stuff, but we didn't get the benefit of cloud. So we migrated to cloud, but we didn't actually change architecture. Or we reduced IT costs, so we cut updates, or we cut investments, so we'd reduce costs, but now we have fragile systems. Or we had project managers that are now called Scrum Masters, but we didn't change any of the ways they worked. So they have these cool new titles, but we didn't actually change how we operated. And so getting to a place where we have a more thoughtful approach to leadership, we understand the technology, and you've heard some great announcements. It requires a deep understanding of this technology to leverage it effectively. So we're not saying you don't need technologists, you need deep technologists, right? You need to understand the impact those technologies' decisions make on your future. And you need IT and the business strategy to work together to fuel one another and drive innovation for your organization. So, you have a good leader. What about the people? We talk a lot about, do we have the right people to lead us into this new world? I believe you do have the right people. We've just taught them how to work in this old model. And so they're doing what we told them to do. We gave them processes, we gave them this structure, and we forced them into it. And so they're doing what you said. Maybe not what you want, but they are operating in the environment that we created. And so if you want people to operate differently, you have to unteach them from working that way and teach them a new way of working and giving them some latitude to actually have what they want taken into account. I just did a interview on DEI, right? We have to have a more diverse workforce that represents better our consumer base and our customers. And so what do organizations want? We traditionally wanted people to stay in their role, take direction, don't ask for raises, right? And be comfortable, right? I want a comfortable performance monologue. I just want to, you just say, yep, that's good, and move on. What do employees want, right? They want to know something about a career path. They want some autonomy to work on cool new things. They want a fair evaluation, and they want to be in a learning environment. And so marrying that up so that you have role models in your organization that people can see, that is a model of how we're going to work in the future, right? We have real change that is being instituted, not just some what we would call cowboys off to the side. Cowboys have just come to town. The rodeo is here if you hadn't seen them yet. They're coming to town. But we called those guys the cowboys that were off doing something wrong. It needs to be the core way of working, this agile, iterative approach. And at Amazon, we would say, be stubborn about the vision of where you want to get to, but flexible on how your teams get there, and give them, again, that autonomy. So, you need to be a modern leader. You have the right people. You need to make sure that the technology that you're employing makes sense And with your people, you need to keep your common sense and treat them as you would have wished to be treated. That golden rule comes back to haunt you. So I thank you for your time. There's a number of these enterprise tracks. Hopefully some of what I have shared has been helpful to you. I'm happy to take a couple of questions if that's helpful. There's also a bunch of resources. Our team has written a bunch of books that are great on dealing with bureaucracy. How do you drive and reach cloud velocity? I love Mark's title, War, Peace, and IT. It feels like that sometimes. Or getting a seat at the table has also been a challenge for some organizations. So these books are great resources, and then our team has also a number of sites out there that you can get access to blogs and videos and ebooks and those types of materials if they're helpful to you. So I'm going to pause there and see if anybody has questions. Thank you.